Hi, I'm Rob Linhart,
I'm Lily Margolis.
and welcome to Hazel's Flight School. Today, we're going to take a little bit of a dive into Chile, that long, skinny country on the west coast of South America. So long, in fact, we're talking about 2,600, 2,700 miles long. That's amazing how long and narrow it is. So we get this coastal influence. We get the Andes Mountains, which are never more than about 350 miles away, and this big central valley in between. And that's where most of the wine that we're talking about is going to come from.
Can we get a little bit of a historical background on Chilean wines?
Sure. Chilean wine probably has the longest history in the New World. First planted in the 1550s. That is so long ago. The conquistadors and the missionaries that came with them brought a grape we know as Pais these days, also known sometimes as the mission grape. Perhaps unsurprising given the missionaries brought it over. And they planted that so they could have communion wine and basically just have grape wine. Being Spaniards and all, they love their wine. So 350, 450 years now or more, they've been growing wine in Chile. All along that way, and this is an important note, just a quick aside, Chile is the only wine growing region with a few tiny exceptions that has never seen phylloxera, that horrible, horrible pest that almost destroyed grape growing all over the world. It almost took out wine growing entirely all across the world. The French, the Americans, the Germans, Europe, everywhere you went, phylloxera has and still continues to be a major problem. But no phylloxera in Chile. So they get to plant ungrafted vines. They can grow from own rooted stock, and they're very proud of that, and rightly so. Lucky them.
What does phylloxera do to grapevines, and how did Chile avoid it?
For starters, Chile avoided phylloxera by having very strict import controls. They are super, super strict and have succeeded in keeping it out. It just hasn't been transported in on other plant material. But phylloxera is technically a louse, and it lives in the soil, and it attacks the roots of grapevines and sucks the sap and basically kills the vines from the roots up. What phylloxera actually doesn't like is a lot of water, and it doesn't like sand. So these rare areas outside of Chile where we find own-rooted vines that have not been killed by phylloxera, we're talking about very sandy soils. Or situations where the roots have been flooded. You can, in theory, flood the vineyard, and if you keep that water there long enough, you can drown the louse and maybe get away with getting rid of that phylloxera. But in Chile's case, it's mostly they've just managed to keep it out, and they're doing a great job of that. We're going to talk about 3 wines today, and for the white that we've chosen a Sauvignon Blanc, and Chile does produce a ton of Sauvignon Blanc. If we go look at our section at Hazel's, the whites from Chile, it's going to be pretty dominated by Sauvignon Blanc. It's had great success there. It can be grown just about anywhere in Chile, all up and down that great long country. Most of the wine growing, by the way, is concentrated in the central part of Chile and the central valley of the central part of Chile. So a few hundred miles north and south of Santiago is really where we see the bulk of it done. But we do see awesome wines being grown all the way down south, basically Patagonia, if you can believe that, and also way up in the far north, where we're really getting into the Atacama. We're getting into some pretty serious desert situations up there. So all through Chile, you'll find it. But again, most of it's concentrated right in that central section and that central valley right there.
All right.
So let's start with our Sauvignon Blanc. So Lily, what do you think?
I like it. It's very stone fruit dominated for me. A really clean, easy drinking feel, nice and refreshing.
I agree. Stone fruit, still bringing some of that Sauvignon Blanc citrus. One of the things this is not really showing, and this is a note we can often find in Chilean Sauvignon Blanc, they can be quite spicy sometimes. And I tend to think of things like red pepper, pickled jalapenos, those sorts of things. And don't get me wrong, a lot of people are into that, and I wouldn't necessarily turn my nose up at it as long as it's got some fruit backing it up. So this is a bit lacking in what we can sometimes consider a distinctive note for those Chilean wines. But that doesn't change the fact that's a delicious, really well-made Sauvignon Blanc. A good illustration of the quality that we can get from Sauvignon Blanc in Chile. And typically the prices are very wallet-friendly. We love them for that.
Yes, we do.
All right, should we move on?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was good Sauvignon Blanc. So we're gonna talk now a little bit about a wine known as Pipeño. Now, my understanding, the translation I got, very loose translation of Pipeño, basically wine you found on the side of the road. And there aren't really particularly specific rules these days about how these wines are made. It doesn't have to be a particular grape. It doesn't have to be oaky or unoaked or any of those things. It's just a classic old style of wine. And it was the original name for the earliest wines that were being grown in Chile back in the day. And again, the vines are just more or less going wild. They've gone wild. And the peasants are out there harvesting grapes. And somehow that became Pipeño. Now, in this case, this particular Pipeño is made from Cinsault, a classic French, Southern French red grape, which has found a home in Chile. Now, I haven't had this wine before, so I'm anxious to check it out.
Let's try it.
All right. Wow, super interesting. What do you think?
On the nose, definitely like a little more of a spicy aroma.
Yeah.
How you were talking
Yeah.
about, that's classic Chilean wine, but not as much on the palate. Seems to be more fruit forward, some plum, some other red fruit, a little bit of an herbal component going on there.
Definitely getting the herbal component for me. I'm also getting something that's just downright meaty. I'm getting almost like a red meat thing or a cured meat kind of tone to this wine as well. That herbal call is a really good one. There's kind of an herbal thing going all over this wine. And on the palate too, I'm getting something almost like hot stone or almost like a bloody nail. And don't let that put you off. It gives great interest to the wine. It gives something more than fruit to the wine. And by the way, those kinds of tasting notes, when you get into these kinds of meaty things or things that can be almost bloody or stony, hot stones and things like that, actually makes them great pairings for food that also can have those components in them. Grilled foods, smoked meats, charcuterie and things like that, aged cheeses are the sorts of things that pair really well here. And those kinds of tasting notes can kind of balance the sharper edges of those kinds of food and let the fruit come out a little more. So those kinds of things do have a place in wine sometimes. And here's a really good example where it doesn't really get in the way of the fruit. Delicious.
Super good. And I also know that this wine is aged in a different type of barrel. Do you want to tell me about that?
Yeah, so the barrels they're using here, traditional Chilean barrels, a type of beech tree known as Rowley. And it should impart something of a slightly more musky type aroma to the wine. Whereas, French American oak tends to bring things like pie spices, coconut, vanilla, those sorts of things. Here, and I think we might be getting a little bit of that muskiness, that herbal component. I'm kind of thinking about meat and hot stone. I could see that possibly being a bit of an influence from the barrel. So yeah, definitely a different kind of wood treatment going on here. Yeah, kind of cool. All right, let's go. Third wine. I can't wait. All right, before I make the big reveal on the wine, what do you think?
This comes off as more acidic and more tannic than the previous wine. Definitely, just more acid driven, I would say.
Got it.
That's for me.
I'm getting a lot of herbal and tobacco and spice notes here to go with some nice red fruits. And as it happens, this particular wine is Cabernet Franc, which should be bringing us some of those spicy notes. I think this is a very classically styled Cabernet Franc. It ticks a lot of boxes for that grape. Now, Chile being a New World country, technically all of the grapes they grow there are international varietals. So we see a lot of Cabernet Sauvignon. We see Sauvignon Blanc. We see Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, what have you. Cabernet Franc, another one of those French varietals that has really found a home here. As it happens, we also see it in Argentina, where it's been very successful. But what they're really showing here is a really good example of a nice, very clean, very, for me, classically styled Cabernet Franc. Another example of how they can grow just about in anything in Chile. They're such a big country. They can find the terroir for anything. And these folks found a great terroir, and they're making a really good Cab Franc. So a wine probably best with a little bit of juicy food, something with fat and protein to kind of play with those tannins a little bit. I thought the Pepeño, you could take it with food or not take it with food. I thought that was a really easy drinking style. And a good illustration again of a fairly less well-known international grape that's finding some success in Chile.
You know, and we have Thanksgiving coming up. I feel like this would just be a great pairing for our Thanksgiving dinner. I think that would be a good one.
I couldn't agree more. It's not too big. It's not too weighty to overpower a game bird like turkey. But certainly with those tannins and with that great depth of fruit, any nice fatty. In my family, we used to do prime rib at Thanksgiving, actually, and we saved the turkey for Christmas. That would work great. Yeah, yummy. Any thoughts or comments?
I don't think so.
All right. So that's a quick dive into Chile here. We've tried to showcase a really common, very popular grape, the Sauvignon Blanc coming out of Chile. And of course, they are so well known for Cabernet Sauvignon, for Merlot, and especially these days, Carmenere. So here, a little quick dive into a few slightly less well-known Chilean grapes to give you an idea of just the variety and the quality and the character of what we can get from Chilean wine. That's going to do it for this episode. Huge thanks to Neyah Margolis and Stelvio Selections for providing their wine and expertise today.
Thanks for flying with us today. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and ask your questions in the comments. Today's trivia question is, what is the name of the traditional wood used in Chilean wine barrels? If you're the first person to correctly answer these questions in the comments of the YouTube video, you'll win a $10 Hazel's gift card.